With that being said, as we go into today's teaching, we find ourselves closing out the series of sermon that began with the season of Advent. And we've been saying that the season of Advent for the church is a season in which we are reminded of what it means to be a church that faithfully waits. Because we find ourselves in a season of in between the first Advent, the first coming of Jesus, and the second Advent, his second coming. And in the Sundays leading up to Christmas Day and Christmas Day itself, we framed our discussion around the first coming of Jesus. But as we get to this last sermon in our Advent series, and as we turn into the new year, we give our attention specifically to what we're looking forward to in this second Advent. With all of the waiting that we're taught to do, and all of the waiting that we're experiencing in our own lives, what is all of that going to amount to? And the vision that we get from the book of Revelation is the new heavens and the new earth. And so what I'd like for us to do is go straight to the very last pages of Scripture to take a look at what this would look like. And so let me read this passage for us before we dive into today's teaching. So Revelation 21, 1 through 6, 22, 1 through 5. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Also, he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. And we're going to jump ahead to the next chapter. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And night will be no more. They will need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. Amen. This is God's word. Now, for those of you, if you have spent any time trying to read and make sense of the book of Revelation, will know that it's quite a challenging task. You may have noticed that the book is filled with cryptic imagery and symbolism. And it takes a lot of effort to try and kind of navigate your way through the book. But here's a quick tip before we get into the teaching on how to read the book of Revelation. It's probably helpful for us to remember that the book of Revelation was written not to be debated thousands of years later about what the end times are going to be like, or to have kind of heated scholarly debates around the meaning of all of this symbolism and imagery and trying to figure it all out. But it was actually written by the Apostle John, most of us believe, to breathe hope into a people that were experiencing some really terrible things that were going on in their lives. That's why it was written, to give hope to a weary and suffering people. And so as we head into the new year and as we look at this text, what I'd like for you to see is that no matter what happens in your life in this next year, there is hope. for you and me. And so what I'd like to do is take a look at this kind of topic of hope as we go through this passage under two headings. First, we'll take a look at what this hope looks like. And secondly, we'll take a look at why this hope is possible and really how we can receive it. What this hope looks like and why it is possible. So first, what does this hope look like? Now here, I just want to say two things. One is that this hope that is promised to us from the Bible is a physical, tangible hope. Many of you may know this book of Revelation is the Apostle John basically gets a vision of the end of time, if you will, the culmination of cosmic history. And as we get to the last chapters of the book of Revelation, this really is the climax, the high point of what is revealed to the apostle as he sees what heaven is like firsthand and what happens. Verse 2 of chapter 21, he says, I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, let me tell you this. When I understood this little verse as a younger Christian, it absolutely changed the way I looked at heaven, absolutely changed the way I looked at Christian hope, and in many ways, it changed the fabric of how I understood Christianity at large. Now, why? Because here's how I thought of heaven. I thought heaven would be a place where I would go to exist as an immaterial soul, like a disembodied existence, right? Floating among the clouds, perhaps playing the harp for all eternity. Also imagine maybe God off to the side somewhere with his white beard and white robe, and we're all just kind of existing as this like chill existence for all of eternity, where there's some good feelings, but generally kind of boring. But here's the picture that we get from heaven. And here's where I borrowed the words from the biblical scholar N.T. Wright. Here's what he says. He says, when we come to the picture of the actual end, in Revelation chapters 21 to 22, we find not ransomed souls making their way to a disembodied heaven, but rather the New Jerusalem, get this, coming down from heaven to earth, uniting the two in a lasting embrace. Do you hear what he said there? He's saying it's not that these disembodied souls go up to some ethereal place that is unknown to us, but he says heaven will come down and make its way into our existence. Here's what this means. It means that at the end of time, God's glory, as we see in other parts of Revelation, God's glory will sweep over all of creation. And at this point, we dare not speculate too much about the specifics of what this might look like. The one thing we know is that we can be certain of, and what we can be certain of is that whatever that's going to happen at this point, we know that it's going to happen and take place in the physical, material realm. And what we find in the book of Revelation is that his glory will heal, redeem, and restore anything and everything it touches, which includes, if you could imagine this right now, which includes the very ground on which you and I are on at this very moment. And by the way, which also includes your very bodies as well. Now, I have to tell you, at this point, we can just kind of pause here. We can spend all afternoon, all day, meditating on and reflecting on and thinking out the implications of what that will be like. But we do have to move on. So let me just get practical here, right? What does that mean for us in the here and now? It means that if the Bible's depiction of heaven is true, and heaven is a physical, material place in which this world that we're occupying is going to be restored and renewed, that means then the Christian hope that we look to, we know that it is intensely tangible. It is intensely practical. Here's what I mean by this. For those of you that haven't seen a dearly loved one for a very, very long time, and you miss them terribly, what do you miss about them? One thing that I think it's safe to assume for all of us is that you don't miss that person as a concept. You don't miss that person as some kind of ethereal apparition. What you don't miss kind of the feelings that you got when you were together with them. All of the things that you miss about them are concrete, can be felt by your senses. What you miss are the tangible memories that you share with them. You miss holding their hand. You miss hearing their voice that has spoken to you. You miss enjoying a meal with them. You miss those long conversations that you might have had around the campfire. And while other religions may tell you, or even some forms of Christianity may tell you that all of those things are immaterial, and what's really important are the concepts, or what we call, quote unquote, spiritual reality, the picture that we get from the Bible is that those things, those material stuff that make up your memories are not just ancillary to what you've experienced with that person. No, it is the stuff of life. Your loved ones, their very bodies, their skin and their bones and their muscles, their embrace that you felt with your own body, the voices that you heard, the crackling of the fire, the heat from it that you've experienced with your senses. All of those things that make up your memory are not ancillary to the heavenly realities. It is the stuff of it. So what Christian hope tells us then is that God made the material world. And this material world is the arena in which we as human beings experience joys, sorrows. It's the arena in which we built our lives and cultivated our relationships. And therefore, God's plan at the end of time is not to simply do away with the material world and wipe it all away. No, His plan is to redeem and restore this world. And just as Jesus, with His resurrected body, remember when He showed up to the disciples after He resurrected? We see this account at the end of the Gospel of John. Right? The disciples are freaking out. They think they saw a ghost. And Jesus says, no, I am not a ghost. Bring me a fish. Let's eat together. And just as Jesus, not as a ghost, but a real, material, resurrected body, showed up to His disciples and shared a meal with them, so will we. In the new heavens and the new earth, we will walk in heaven. We will sing, we will shout, we will hug, we will kiss, we will dance. We will eat and drink, all to the glory of God and to our heart's content. Do you see the kind of consolation that we have in the new heavens and the new earth? All that you have lost, it will be given back to you. But it's not just consolation, it's the fulfillment of our deepest desires. I love watching food documentaries. I often kind of daydream, how amazing would it be if I were to travel the world and try all the best cuisines that the world has to offer. And then I quickly come back to my senses and be like, probably not going to happen in this lifetime. But man, what a consolation it is to know whatever it is that we miss out on this life will be more than made up for not just in some removed, disembodied sense, but physically. That is the Christian hope. To know that there is a physical, material feast that is waiting for us at the end of time. This is a tangible hope. This is a kind of hope that affirms the goodness of the world. And the hope is that though things may be broken now, that everything that you and I can see, touch, feel, taste, smell will be redeemed and restored. It's a tangible hope. But secondly, we also know that this hope is here, but not yet. This hope is here, but not yet. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at verses 3 to 4 of chapter 21, here's what it says. It's a description of what's going to happen. It says, He will, and talking about God, He will dwell with them. And they, God's people, will be His people. And God Himself will be with them as their God. It says, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. Right? What's being described here are things that will happen in the future. And we see that, okay, it makes sense. It's a picture of heaven, so it's going to happen at some point in the future. But look at the verse that comes right after that in verse 5. John gets another vision, and he says, And He who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Now it's in the present tense. So you may be asking, wait, hold on a second. Is heaven something that's going to happen in the future? Or is it something that's happening in the here and now? And the answer to that is yes. Because here's what's going on. God is going to make all things new at some point in the future. But we also know that to varying degrees, that work has already begun. Now, here's what this means. On the one hand, there's a degree of this heavenly reality that can be felt in the here and now. And here's what happens. As you bring your own heart, as you bring your life, as you bring your family life, as you bring your work, as you bring your business, as you bring your relationships, right? As they are brought under the authority and the kingship and the rule of Jesus, as they are brought before the throne of Jesus, what will happen inevitably, slowly but surely, is that these heavenly realities will seep into your reality. And so to some degree, you're always going to be experiencing bits and pieces of this redeeming work in the here and now. But what's also true is that as much as we may be experiencing that here and now, that the full realization of this heavenly reality will not be had until the new heavens and the new earth. It's here, but not yet. Now you may be saying, okay, like what difference does that make? Well, here's the difference that it makes in your life. If you were to hold on to a Christian hope, it'll keep you from being either overly optimistic about life or overly pessimistic. But it's not some kind of middle ground that you're going to occupy, because the Christian hope is neither of those things, but it drives you deeper into something that is more profoundly empowering and encouraging and life-giving than either of those two options. Here's what I mean by that. I know some of you may be experiencing a long, prolonged season of illness. Or maybe you've been dealing with some kind of physical pain for a long time. And as you look at that illness that you may be experiencing, there are two options that you could have, it seems like. You can either say, you know what, God is making all things new. Right? I know that His heart and His plan is for me to be healed. And so here's what I need to do. I just need to pray in faith. I need to claim those promises. And God is in some ways obligated to heal me. That's His plan, after all. But here's the trouble with that. What if you are not healed? As it often happens. Does that mean you are not praying as much as you should? Does that mean your faith was not as strong as it should be? Did you misread God somewhere? Is it not his plan for you to be healed? On the other hand, you may be on the more pessimistic side. You know, I've seen these kind of healing prayers happen all the time, and they almost never work. And so God's plan is not for him to heal me, but he will heal me at the end of time. And so I'm going to resign myself over to this reality that I'm stuck with this pain, that I'm stuck with this illness. And so the only thing that I'll pray for is that God will give me the right kind of attitude and perhaps patience to kind of wait this out. And maybe one day it will happen. But what I want to tell you is that neither of those attitudes is indicative of Christian hope. Because here's what Christian hope says. Christian hope says, I know my God is making all things new, and therefore I know God is fully capable of healing me. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask in faith, and I'm going to keep praying, and I'm going to eagerly anticipate what God is going to do, right? I am going to refuse to let my heart grow cold and cynical, as is so easy to happen. But Christian hope also says, but even if he doesn't heal me, I have a greater hope than I can even imagine with what I'm asking for right now. Because one thing that the Bible tells me is that there will come a time when my ailing body will be so much more than healed. And at this point, your imagination might take you to crazy places. You may say, I'll be flying across the oceans. There will be an energy and life that is within my body that I can't even comprehend right now. So if I am healed, great. I'm going to pray in anticipation for it. I'm going to ask for it. But even if it does not, it'll only drive me deeper into the hope of the resurrection, of what will happen to my body in the future. Friends, do you understand how scary, powerful you can be if you had this Christian hope? You are indestructible. Because this hope is realistic about the brokenness of life. So when suffering comes your way, you are not surprised. You are not blindsided. You are not beating yourself up over the fact that maybe you didn't have enough faith, or maybe you didn't pray enough, maybe you weren't a good Christian enough. But this hope is also at the same time more powerful and expansive than you can even imagine. So that when you were to have this hope, you can take on anything in life. And at this point, I can't help but think of the story of Daniel's three friends, remember? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you look at Daniel chapter 3, what's happening to them? They're staring down the furnace as a consequence for not bowing down before an idol. Do you remember what they say? Here's what they say. If this be so, if you're to throw us into the furnace, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Do you see the certainty? But, listen to this, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Do you hear what they're saying? We serve a God who is fully capable of delivering us, and we have full assurance that he will. But guess what? Even if he decides not to in his infinite wisdom, and if you were to be burned alive, we are thrown into the furnace, and if you were to die, we are awaiting a resurrection that is far better than the life that we have right now. Do you see how indestructible they were because of this hope? And do you realize that this hope, this same hope, is available for you and me? So here's what we find, that this hope is a physical, material one. It is here, but not fully yet. But there's power in it. And we do have to look at the next point and ask the question, now, what makes this hope possible? And how are we to experience this hope for us, ourselves in the here and now? So let's look at the next point. Now, if you were to look at the last couple of verses in today's passage, if you were to look at verses 4 to 5 in chapter 22, here's what it says. It says, they will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and night will be no more. They will need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. Friends, I have to tell you as a preacher, there are many passages that you come across and you're just like, I have no words to be able to fully articulate or capture the magnitude of what is in front of me. And this is one of those instances. But here's my feeble attempt. Because this passage is describing a reality in which God, in all of his brilliance and glory, is fully revealed to our senses. And there will be a time in which we will see this God face to face. The Apostle Paul, as he's meditating on this reality, says in 1 Corinthians 13, where he says, now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully. I remember going to my very first live sporting event. This was back when I lived in Boston. I went to a Boston Celtics game. And this was over like 20 years ago. And back in the day, if you were to go to the game early enough, like before the game during shoot around, you actually could go down and get as close as you could to the court. And so, of course, my friends and I, we did that. We were like heckling the opposing team. But I remember just laying my eyes on these players for the first time in the flesh and not on TV. And I remember thinking, wow, these guys are huge. They were so tall and big. But they were like lumbering giants. You know, all they were doing is just kind of shooting around and doing layup drills. But I remember, man, there's such grace in their movement, fluidity, and they moved with such ease. It was like I was watching a ballerina. And I remember like, man, it doesn't even feel like they're human beings. Or maybe they're like a human being, but like new and improved kind. And I remember my jaw just kind of dropped to the floor and saying, this is unbelievable. And being awestruck by their beauty. What this passage is telling us is that the light of God's glory, when it is fully revealed to the senses, will be kind of like that, but infinitely more transformative, infinitely more impactful. While we know him through the words of these pages, and we get passing glimpses of his glory in different Christian experiences, but when we see him face to face, what we know is that the light of this God's glory will be such that he will light up the universe. And what these verses tell us is that his glory will be so bright that things like the sun and the moon and the stars, even if they exist, will be superfluous because the light of God will light up the nations. And what we also find is that this glorious God decides to dwell with man. And this is what makes all of this possible. Do you know that there are people in your life you would describe as the kind of person that when they enter into the room, they light up the whole place? Right? Maybe their personality is such that you just feel good in their presence. Maybe you admire them so much that when they enter into the room, you can't help but take notice. And when they start speaking, they're so full of wisdom and love that you can't help but kind of tune into what they're saying. They light up the room. Now, it's just an expression, of course, for sure. But you do know people that are like this. See, what we find here in these verses is that God's wisdom and his power, his holiness and his justice and his goodness and his truth are such that when he decides to fully come to dwell with us, the entire cosmos will not be able to help but be healed and restored by his mere presence. Such is the beauty and the glory of God. And that's, friend, that's where your hope is. In God himself. Now here's the last thing before we go into a time of prayer. If that's in store for the future, and if God indeed is your hope, and he's doing the work of bringing that hope into your life right now, how can you and I receive it now? Right? How can we experience it? Here's the answer. If you were to look at verse 6 of chapter 21, this is Jesus speaking. Listen to what he says. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. But listen to what he says right after. To the thirsty, I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. Notice here, Jesus says, he doesn't say, I'm going to give this to those who have their lives figured out. Right? It's not to those who are moral. Right? It's not to those who are religious. It's not to those who are morally upright. Not to those who attend church every Sunday. As good as those things are, Jesus doesn't say those things, does he? He says, it is to those who are thirsty he will give. Friends, let me just say this as we close. I wonder how many of you have made New Year's resolutions to be a better person. And those are good. Can be inspiring and encouraging. I've made quite a few myself. But here's what I need you to know this afternoon. What I need you to know is that God, if you could hear me, I need you to know that God is not after what you produce. Do you realize that? God is not after what you can do for him. Sure, if you're to do well and accomplish a lot of things in life, he'll be happy for you. He'll cheer you on as you do it. Right? He'll give you all that you need to do well, and he's all for it. But you need to know that he doesn't need that from you. What you need to know is that God's delight is to fill you with his glory. God's delight is for him to shine the light of his glory upon you. His delight is to lift up your countenance, to give you his peace, his joy, his strength, for you to experience his beauty. So friends, as we enter into this new year together, let me encourage you. Would you go and learn what it means for you to abide in him? Will you go and learn what it means to enjoy God who is delighted and pleased to dwell with you? Would you spend this next year eagerly receiving all that he has for you?